Gate C17. Late afternoon light on polished floors. A voice in a crisp uniform says a seat might be too small for a woman who has never once shrunk herself. Cameras rise. A crowd leans in. And one calm passenger sets down a quiet leather briefcase that can change the fate of an airline. Who decides who belongs in first class? What happens when a routine humiliation meets a mind trained to document and a heart trained to stay steady? When the woman they try to shame holds the pen over $1 billion contract, does power explode or does it exhale? Will a single decision at a boarding door echo through boardrooms, courtrooms, and living rooms? How far will a company go to protect its image? How far will one leader go to protect dignity? This is the story of Dr. Ayanna Morgan on Flight 609. It begins with a sentence meant to wound and becomes a blueprint for change. If you believe quiet courage can move walls, you are in the right place. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Then settle in. The story is about to take off. The boarding area at Gate C17 was humming with the usual late afternoon tension. The smell of brewed coffee drifted from a kiosk nearby, blending with the faint scent of jet fuel from the tarmac. Flight 609 to Washington D.C. was nearly ready to board. First-class passengers had been called, and a short line had formed at the jet bridge. Dr. Ayanna Morgan stepped forward with the measured pace of someone who never rushed for anyone. She carried a deep brown leather briefcase in her left hand and a neatly folded boarding pass in her right. Her tailored navy blazer fit perfectly over a cream blouse, and her hair was styled in soft, natural waves. She was here for business, real business, the kind that could reshape federal policy. But for now, she was just another passenger waiting to take her seat. That illusion shattered the moment Cynthia Blake, the senior flight attendant stationed at the boarding door, looked up. "This seat might be challenging for someone of your dimensions," Cynthia said, her voice light but sharp enough to cut. Her eyes drifted toward Ayanna's figure, and the words hung in the air like a bad smell. The man behind Ayanna looked up from his phone. A woman across the aisle froze mid-step. Phones began to appear in people's hands. Ayanna didn't flinch. She simply paused, meeting Cynthia's gaze with calm, steady eyes. Years of encountering this exact brand of veiled insult had taught her something important. Silence could be louder than outrage. Inside, though, she felt the familiar stir not of shame, but of calculation. She wondered how far Cynthia would go if left unchecked. A teenage girl in seat 4B, boarding just behind Ayanna, glanced at her phone. With a subtle motion, she tapped "Go Live" on her TikTok screen. The words appeared, "Live boarding flight. 609 viewer, count 12, 18, 27. May I see your boarding pass?" Cynthia asked. The request wasn't unusual, but the way she said it was. There was no welcome in her tone, only suspicion. Ayanna offered the pass without a word. The corner of the paper brushed Cynthia's manicured fingers. Cynthia held it up to the light as though searching for invisible ink. She flipped it over, then back again, as if a secret might be hiding between the fibers. "First class," Cynthia said, the syllables dripping with disbelief. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" There it was, the small smirk, the little public performance. Ayanna glanced around. The businessman 2 spots back raised an eyebrow. The teenage live streamer's viewer count ticked upward: 46, 73, 91. Somebody in the comments typed, "Oh no, this is going to get ugly." A voice came over the gate's intercom, calling for remaining first-class passengers to board. Patrick Sloan, the gate supervisor, approached with a polite but performative smile. "What's the situation?" "Cynthia," he asked. "I just want to confirm this ticket," Cynthia said, holding it like evidence. "You know how particular our premium passengers can be about their experience." Patrick nodded gravely, as though Ayanna's existence posed a legitimate threat to the sanctity of first class. Ayanna took in the scene, the tightening circle of onlookers, the rising phone cameras, the shift in air. Her grip tightened ever so slightly on her briefcase. She thought of the meeting waiting for her in Washington, the binders of classified recommendations, the senators who would be in the room, and she thought of her father's voice, steady in memory. "Let them speak. They'll show you everything you need to know." Patrick cleared his throat. "Ma'am, sometimes tickets get mixed up. People use other people's accounts. We just need to verify for everyone's safety." A murmur rippled through the boarding area. On the live stream, 146 viewers. In the chat, "That sounds like discrimination, and she hasn't done anything wrong." Lynn Parker, the new flight attendant trainee, stood quietly near the beverage cart. She wasn't part of this exchange officially, but she'd been told to observe real-world situations for training. Her training tablet was already recording, an automatic function during passenger disputes. The lens captured everything: Cynthia's smirk, Patrick's posture, Ayanna's calm face. "Do you have any other ID?" Patrick asked. His tone was courteous, but the question itself was unnecessary. Ayanna's boarding pass was valid and clearly labeled First Class 2A. "I do," Ayanna said simply. Her voice was low, unhurried. She reached for her wallet, moving with the deliberate grace of someone used to having their every motion watched. In her mind, she was already considering variables. Should she escalate now, or let them build their own case against themselves? Should she give them a chance to realize the mistake before she revealed who she was? Or was this one of those moments where revealing the truth too early would rob the lesson of its impact? Her fingers brushed the smooth leather of her credential holder. She paused, not for drama, but for thought. Then she let her hand fall back to her side. "I'll provide it if absolutely necessary," she said, meeting Patrick's gaze without blinking. The livestream chat exploded Queen energy, and she's not even raising her voice. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. Patrick's polite smile tightened. Around them, the boarding process slowed, and passengers hesitated before stepping forward. "Gate C17 status update." A voice crackled over Patrick's radio. "Minor passenger verification issue." Patrick replied, "Should be resolved shortly." Ayanna caught the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in Cynthia's posture. It was the satisfaction of someone who thought they were winning a small battle in public view. Ayanna knew better. Sometimes the most important moves were made in complete stillness. She shifted her briefcase in her lap, the gold clasp catching the fluorescent light. For a split second, a corner of an embossed federal seal peeked from beneath the leather strap. Tara's recording caught it. So did two passengers in the line, who exchanged curious looks. The teenage live streamer's viewer count hit 193. Someone typed, "Wait, is that a government seal on her bag?" Ayanna said nothing, not yet. Timing was everything, and she had all the time in the world. Patrick held the boarding pass as if weighing it for authenticity. He flipped it over again, then glanced at Cynthia, who stood with her arms folded, chin slightly raised. The line at the gate had stalled. Passengers shifted impatiently, some looking annoyed, others pulling out phones to see if this scene had already made it onto social media. The teenager in seat 4B whispered to her friend off camera. "We're already at 240 viewers," she said, eyes fixed on her screen. Comments rolled by so fast she could barely read them. "Is this body shaming? What airline is this? I swear I saw a government logo on her bag." Cynthia cleared her throat and addressed Ayanna again, louder this time. Dr. Morgan, we have strict guidelines for premium seating. It's my responsibility to ensure all passengers can be seated safely and comfortably. You understand? Ayanna met her gaze. I do understand the importance of safety, she replied evenly. But I also understand my seat assignment is valid and my boarding pass is correct. Her voice carried just enough to be heard by the passengers clustered nearby. A few people nodded subtly. Someone in the crowd murmured, "She's not doing anything wrong." Patrick stepped closer, his voice low but edged with condescension. Sometimes there are misunderstandings about ticket upgrades. People use family accounts, corporate points, even expired credentials. We're just making sure. Ayanna could feel the weight of the room tilting. Every additional sentence from them was building a wall of assumption and suspicion. She could end this now. She could flash her identification, watch their faces change, and be done with it. But that would only resolve the insult for her, not the deeper problem behind it. Inside, her thoughts turned to the meeting waiting in Washington. She had spent months preparing a set of recommendations that could overhaul contractor compliance in aviation. If this incident was any indication, her report was more urgent than she had realized. And perhaps this was an opportunity, an unplanned field test in real time. The teenager's live stream ticked past 300 viewers. Comments multiplied. Gate C17, Flight 609. Look it up. Sky Vista Airways trending soon. Cynthia leaned toward Patrick and stage whispered, "We can't have other first-class passengers complaining. They pay for a certain level of experience." The word hung heavy. Experience. It was not about the width of a seat or the space in the cabin. It was about who belonged and who didn't, according to an unspoken template. Ayanna watched Patrick nod in agreement with Cynthia's unguarded comment. Lynn Parker's tablet continued recording, the red light blinking steadily. Her training manual hadn't prepared her for this, but instinct told her the footage could matter later. A man in line pulled out his phone and began typing on LinkedIn. Witnessing blatant discrimination right now at Gate C17 Sky Vista Airways. Thread below. His fingers moved quickly. The title alone would catch attention. Patrick handed the boarding pass back to Ayanna but didn't step aside. "Ma'am, could I also see the credit card you used to purchase this ticket?" "I used a government account," Ayanna said without hesitation. Patrick frowned. "Then I'll need to verify through our system. Could you wait over here while I check the live stream surge to 480 viewers?" The teenager turned the camera slightly to capture the widening circle of onlookers. You could hear snippets of passengers' conversations in the background. "This is ridiculous. Why don't they just let her sit? Bet they wouldn't do this to someone else." Ayanna glanced toward the jet bridge. The interior lights glowed warmly, a path to the seat she had been assigned. It was less than 50 feet away, yet suddenly unreachable because of two employees' insistence on making her prove her worthiness to occupy it. She kept her tone steady. "Is there a specific policy you're following right now?" "Mr. Sloan," Patrick hesitated. "Company procedures for premium seating eligibility." "Is that in writing?" He blinked. "Excuse me, is that policy documented in your passenger manual?" Ayanna's voice was calm, but the question was surgical. Cynthia spoke up quickly. "We're trained to identify potential issues before they become problems." Ayanna considered that answer. "And in your view, my presence here is a problem." Cynthia's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at Patrick for backup. "We just want to ensure the comfort and safety of all our guests." The businessman's LinkedIn post was already drawing engagement. 2 passengers had discreetly joined the teenager's live stream. Lynn's camera caught every exchange, every hesitation, every sideways glance. From somewhere down the terminal, a voice on the public address system announced a delay for another flight. The boarding area for Flight 609, however, was locked in its own quiet storm. Patrick shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, if you could step aside, we'll resolve this quickly." Ayanna tilted her head slightly. "What exactly needs resolving? My ticket is valid, my seat is assigned, and I'm here before departure." The teenager's live stream hit 600 viewers. Comments flashed by. "This is textbook discrimination. Hope she knows her rights. They're gonna regret this." Cynthia's patience seemed to thin. "It's not about your rights. It's about following procedure." That sentence landed like a stone. Several passengers looked up sharply. The businessman paused mid-typing, clearly filing that phrase in his mind. Ayanna let the silence stretch for a moment. Then she said, "I'm very familiar with procedures." Her gaze drifted briefly to her briefcase. Inside were documents that could change the future of this airline contracts, compliance reports, and sealed recommendations for the Senate Transportation Committee. She wondered if either Cynthia or Patrick had the faintest idea of the gravity of what they were playing with. Patrick exhaled and looked toward the gate podium. "I'll just check the system. It won't take a moment." He stepped away, leaving Cynthia standing guard. The air between her and Ayanna was taut, but Ayanna's posture remained relaxed. This was not the first time she had been underestimated in a public space, and she suspected it would not be the last. But she had no intention of letting this one pass without consequence. The teenager whispered again, "We're at 780 viewers now." Ayanna heard it, though she did not look in that direction. She didn't need to. She knew the story was already leaving this room, traveling at the speed of signal to every corner of the internet, and that meant whatever happened next would not vanish quietly. Patrick walked toward the podium, boarding pass in hand, tapping the keyboard with slow deliberation. He didn't notice that his body language, the careful inspection, the sideways glances toward Ayanna was being captured from 3 different angles. Every second was feeding the growing library of footage already spreading beyond Gate C17. Ayanna remained standing in the same place, her briefcase resting on her forearm. She had not raised her voice once. She had not stepped forward or back. She simply stood, a still figure in the middle of the bottleneck, letting the moment expand. Years of public service had taught her that sometimes the most powerful move was to wait. Cynthia stayed at the boarding door, occasionally glancing at the line of first-class passengers now backed up into the main terminal. She shifted from foot to foot, as though the delay were Ayanna's fault rather than her own. The teenage live streamer was now up to 980 viewers. Her comments section was a flood of outrage and speculation. People were asking for names, flight numbers, and even tagging major news outlets. Someone wrote, "This is going viral in the next 10 minutes." Another user replied, "It's already viral." Look at Twitter. Ayanna's thoughts shifted briefly to her father, a man who had endured far worse in his lifetime without a camera to bear witness. She remembered him telling her, "The truth always shows itself if you give it room." The memory steadied her. She inhaled slowly, exhaled without hurry. Patrick returned, holding the boarding pass. "Our system confirms your seat," he said, "but we still need to verify the payment method used." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. And what exactly would that prove? Patrick's tone grew defensive. "It's standard procedure to ensure all premium passengers meet eligibility requirements." "Eligibility requirements?" Ayanna repeated softly, as if tasting the phrase. Do those include visual assessments made at the boarding door? Cynthia's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The businessman in line had finished his first LinkedIn post and was already drafting a follow-up. He typed quickly, "Second update. Passenger has valid ticket and confirmed seat." Gate staff continuing to question her legitimacy based solely on appearance. Documenting in real time. The comment count on his post began climbing. Inside the cabin, some seated passengers craned their necks toward the boarding door, curious about the delay. Lynn Parker's training tablet continued recording, the quiet blinking light the only sign it was active. She felt a knot in her stomach. In her brief time with the airline, she had seen tense interactions before, but never one that felt so clearly one-sided. She knew she had no authority to intervene, but her instinct told her that this documentation might be important later. Cynthia leaned closer to Ayanna. "We just want to avoid any disruption once we're in the air." Ayanna met her gaze. "The only disruption so far is happening here." The words were calm, not sharp, but they landed with precision. A few passengers murmured in agreement. Someone behind the businessman said, "She's right. This is holding up the whole flight." The teenager's live stream crossed 1,300 viewers. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, with notifications from people sharing the link. A viewer commented, "This woman is handling herself like a boss." Another wrote, "Watch the crew dig themselves deeper." Patrick placed the boarding pass back into Ayanna's hand, but did not step aside. "Ma'am, I'm asking you one last time to provide additional identification." Ayanna glanced down at her briefcase. The temptation to end this was there. A single flash of credentials would stop this entire charade in seconds. But something inside her resisted. She wasn't here to make it easier for them to save face. She was here to ensure they saw, and that everyone watching saw the exact nature of their actions. Her inner voice was steady. "Not yet." "I'll provide whatever is legally required," she said, "but I will not step aside for an unfounded inspection based on personal bias." The businessman lifted his head at that line, clearly noting it for his post. Cynthia's face tightened. She glanced over her shoulder toward the jet bridge, as if expecting someone to step in and back her up. No one did. From the terminal speaker system, an announcement broke the tension for a brief second. "Attention passengers on Flight 609 to Washington. Please be prepared for departure at 3:00 p.m. sharp." Ayanna checked her watch. 2:50 p.m. 10 minutes. She thought of the secure conference room in Washington, the folder of classified recommendations waiting for her signature. She could already see the faces of the committee members glancing at their watches when she didn't arrive on time. Patrick took a half step back, possibly sensing that the ground beneath him was shifting. "We're just trying to follow protocol," he said. Softer now. Ayanna tilted her head. "Then I suggest you review what your actual protocol states." Lynn's eyes flicked between the three of them. The quiet blinking of the recording light felt almost like a heartbeat. The teenage live streamer was now at 1,700 viewers. Her chat was buzzing with people demanding the airline's official statement. Some were tagging Sky Vista's corporate account directly. Others were digging up the company's recent press releases about diversity and inclusion, reposting them with sarcastic captions. Ayanna's phone buzzed in her blazer pocket. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from her assistant Senate committee. Moved start time to 3:30 past. "You have some breathing room?" She slid the phone back without replying, her mind sharpening around the opportunity this extra time presented. Cynthia folded her arms again, clearly frustrated that Ayanna was not reacting the way she expected. No raised voice, no flustered retreat, just unwavering calm. That composure was beginning to draw more sympathy from the crowd. People were no longer just curious. Some were actively rooting for her. Patrick glanced at the growing group of onlookers, his voice a little tighter now. We really need to keep the boarding process moving. Then perhaps you should let me board, Ayanna said, her tone still level. A ripple of agreement passed through the passengers. Someone clapped once, then stopped when Cynthia's eyes swept the area. The businessman posted his third update crowd, now openly supporting passenger. Airline staff refusing to let her board despite confirmed ticket. Public relations disaster unfolding. Ayanna adjusted her grip on the briefcase. She knew she had the leverage to end this instantly, but the timing still wasn't right. She wanted the picture complete, the evidence undeniable. She wanted every word, every unnecessary step, every moment of hesitation preserved in memory and in footage. The teenager's live stream hit 200 viewers. In the chat, someone wrote, "She's about to drop something big." Another replied, "Wait for it." Ayanna's calm was unshakable. She could feel the room shifting not in her favor by luck, but by the sheer weight of her patience. And she knew that once she decided to reveal the truth, it would not just change the tone of this boarding gate, it would change the trajectory of the airline itself. She looked at Cynthia, then at Patrick. "If we're done here, I'll take my seat." No one moved. The boarding area felt like it was holding its breath. Patrick still stood between Ayanna and the jet bridge. Cynthia slightly behind him, her posture rigid. The line of first-class passengers had thinned as some decided to step aside, unwilling to be caught in the middle of whatever this was. Others stayed close, clearly unwilling to miss the outcome. Ayanna shifted her briefcase in her arm. The leather creaked softly as she adjusted her grip, and for a moment the gold clasp reflected the overhead light. A corner of embossed lettering peeked from beneath the strap. Subtle but distinctive, it was the type of detail most people would overlook unless they were trained to notice. In the far corner, "Lynn Parker noticed?" Her eyes lingered on the faint seal before flicking back to Ayanna's face. Cynthia's gaze flickered to the briefcase, but she either did not recognize what she was looking at or chose to ignore it. Instead, she spoke with a tight smile. "We have to ensure that every passenger meets the airline's premium travel standards. I'm sure you understand. Dr. Morgan." Ayanna held her gaze. "What I understand," she said, "is that my ticket is confirmed, my seat is assigned, and your system has already verified both." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The teenager's livestream viewer count passed 2,800. In the comment feed, someone had already posted a screenshot of the boarding pass from earlier in the stream. The details were clear. First Class 2A, Sky Vista Airways, Los Angeles to Washington D.C. Departure 3. Varp, ma'am. Patrick cleared his throat. "We still have questions about the payment method?" "Then ask them directly." Ayanna replied. He hesitated, clearly not expecting that answer. Was this purchased using a personal credit card or through another account? Ayanna let the question hang for a moment. Through a federal account. That drew a few raised eyebrows among the onlookers. The businessman on LinkedIn updated his post. "Passenger confirms government purchase. Situation escalating. PR nightmare deepening." Patrick shifted his weight. "Then I'll need to confirm authorization." Ayanna's lips curved just slightly. "And who in your chain of command is authorized to verify a federal purchase?" Patrick blinked. He glanced at Cynthia, but she was suddenly busy scanning the crowd, avoiding eye contact. Inside, Ayanna was measuring every beat of this exchange. She could have ended it at any point, but the goal was bigger than herself. If she revealed everything too soon, this would become a quiet apology at the gate and nothing more. She needed this moment documented in its entirety, in front of witnesses, with every word preserved. Only then could it be used to drive the change she had been working toward for years. The teenager's phone pinged again. She read a comment aloud in a whisper. Someone says they're already tagging the Department of Transportation. Cynthia exhaled sharply. This is delaying the entire boarding process. We have to think of all our passengers. Ayanna's voice was calm. Yes, we do. That simple agreement seemed to throw Cynthia off balance for a second. Ayanna took a step forward, not aggressive, just enough to close the gap between herself and the boarding door. The air felt charged, as if everyone was waiting for someone to make a decisive move. Lynn's hands tightened slightly on the tablet. She had not been told exactly what to do in situations like this, but she had a sense she was witnessing something important. Her instincts told her to keep recording and to make sure the footage stayed safe. Patrick looked toward the gate podium. I'm going to call for a secondary verification. Please wait here. Ayanna's voice followed him as he stepped away. Take your time. I have all the time I need. It was not a threat. It was a fact. But the way she said it carried weight, enough that a few passengers exchanged glances. Cynthia lingered by the door, clearly uncomfortable with the growing attention. Ayanna turned to look at her. Tell me, Ms. Blake, what training does Sky Vista provide on identifying potential passenger issues? Cynthia straightened. We are trained to spot irregularities before boarding. And what irregularities have you spotted in my case? Ayanna asked. Cynthia's eyes flickered, and for a moment she had no answer. We have to make sure that I belong here. Ayanna finished for her. The pause was thick enough to feel. The live stream feed had comments pouring in by the second. Someone typed, "She's calling them out without even raising her voice." Another wrote, "This is the definition of composure under fire." Patrick returned, his expression less confident than before. We're waiting on a supervisor's clearance. It shouldn't be long. Ayanna glanced at her watch. 2:54 p.m. 6 minutes to scheduled departure. She could see the pilot's silhouette through the cockpit window, moving between controls. Captain Robert Ellison had likely been informed there was a boarding delay without knowing the specifics. She wondered what he would think when he saw the real reason. The businessman's third update was live crowd growing restless. Passenger remains calm and articulate. Airline staff struggling to justify continued delay. Ayanna adjusted the briefcase again. This time, the embossed seal was fully visible for a brief moment before she shifted it back into place. A few people in the crowd leaned forward, trying to get a better look. Patrick noticed and frowned. What's in the case? Ma'am, work materials, Ayanna said simply. May I ask what kind of work? You may ask, she replied, but I'll answer when the time is right. Cynthia's lips pressed into a thin line. The balance of control in the conversation was shifting, and she could feel it. The steady patience in Ayanna's demeanor was not weakness. It was strategy, and it was starting to show. Patrick's radio crackled. A voice said, "Verification in progress. Stand by." Ayanna stood exactly where she was, not moving an inch. She could feel the moment building, the current pulling everyone towards something inevitable. When the reveal came, it would not just be a turning point for her, it would be a lesson for every person in the airline who thought appearance was an acceptable metric for judgment. The teenager's viewer count climbed past 3,500. Comments scrolled fast. Someone wrote, "She's playing the long game." Another replied, "And they have no idea." Ayanna's phone buzzed. This time she glanced at the screen. A short text from her assistant. "All good here. Let me know if you need support from D.C. She smiled faintly and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Patrick looked at her, then at the crowd, then back again. "We'll have this sorted shortly." Ayanna nodded once. "I'm sure you will." The air at Gate C17 had changed. The initial hum of idle conversation had been replaced by the low murmur of collective disapproval. People who moments ago had been strangers were now glancing at each other with a shared understanding. The delay was no longer just an inconvenience, it was a performance, and the audience was starting to take sides. Ayanna stood in the same spot, her posture relaxed but unyielding. Patrick hovered near the podium, avoiding eye contact. Cynthia shifted her weight from one foot to the other, scanning the boarding line as if looking for someone who might support her. None of the passengers stepped forward. The teenage live streamer's phone buzzed with nonstop notifications. The viewer count surged past 4,100. In the scrolling comments, a user wrote, "Someone send this to a reporter." Another replied, "Already done. Waiting for the story to break." The girl's friend leaned over her shoulder, whispering, "People are screen recording this now." From the first-class queue, a woman in a tailored gray suit stepped out of line. She walked over to Ayanna and spoke just loudly enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "You're handling this better than most people would. I hope they realize that." Ayanna gave a polite nod. "Thank you." The woman returned to her spot in line, but her brief interruption had an effect. It broke the thin barrier of silence among the bystanders. A man in a leather jacket muttered, "This is ridiculous," and the sentiment rippled outward. Soft at first, then louder. The quiet support grew into a steady undercurrent of solidarity. Lynn Parker's training tablet captured every shift in body language. Her recording now showed a distinct change. Passengers leaning in, nodding at Ayanna's measured responses, eyes narrowing at Cynthia's insistence on procedures that no one else seemed to require. Cynthia tried to reassert control. "Folks, we'll get everyone seated shortly. Please be patient." The man in the leather jacket responded, "We'd be seated already if you just let her on." Patrick looked up from the podium, his expression tightening. He clearly wanted this to end, but not in a way that would make him appear wrong. Ayanna watched him wrestle with his options. The businessman on LinkedIn posted another update: passenger support now audible. Staff ignoring calls from crowd to let her board. Incident likely to escalate if unresolved. His post was now being shared beyond his immediate network, catching the attention of a few corporate PR professionals who recognized the potential fallout. Inside the aircraft, Captain Robert Ellison had been briefed on a boarding delay due to verification. He walked down the jet bridge, stopping just behind Cynthia. His voice was calm but firm. "How much longer is this going to take?" Cynthia straightened. "Just resolving a verification issue, Captain." Ellison's eyes moved to Ayanna, then back to Cynthia. Something in his gaze suggested he was unconvinced this was about verification at all. "We need to close the door in 6 minutes." Ayanna remained silent, letting their own time pressure become part of the tension. She could feel the energy tilting further in her favor. This was no longer just about her boarding a plane. This was about the spectacle that Cynthia and Patrick had created, one that now had dozens of witnesses and thousands of viewers. The teenage live streamer whispered into her phone, "We just hit 5,000. The comments scrolled by too fast to read in full. Snippets flashed, "Lawyer up." "She's going to own this airline." This is federal lawsuit territory. Patrick returned from a brief phone call, his jaw set. We're still waiting for higher authorization. Ayanna looked at him steadily. And in the meantime, you've delayed your own flight, inconvenienced your passengers, and displayed behavior that is now being documented and broadcast live. He froze for a second. She had not raised her voice, but the statement carried the precision of a legal argument. Several passengers murmured in agreement. The woman in the gray suit nodded again. Cynthia exhaled sharply. We're just trying to maintain the integrity of the first-class experience, Ayanna replied. Integrity is a word that depends entirely on the actions behind it. The line landed. Even Captain Ellison seemed to pause, as though filing it away. Lynn felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety as she recorded. She knew she was capturing the moment the crowd shifted from passive observers to active supporters. The footage would show the exact point where Cynthia's authority began to crumble. Patrick's radio crackled. Gate C17 status pending verification, he said quickly, then lowered his voice. We're almost there. But they weren't. They were at an impasse, and Ayanna knew it. The clock was ticking, the cameras were rolling, and the tide of public opinion in that boarding area had turned against them. From the far end of the terminal, 2 ground crew members walked past, glancing at the growing crowd. One of them muttered something to the other, and they both shook their heads. The optics were bad, and everyone could feel it. The teenage live streamer's phone buzzed again. She grinned. Someone just donated $50 to keep me streaming. Ayanna caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. She didn't smile, but internally she acknowledged the irony. Strangers across the internet were now financially invested in this moment. Patrick approached again. Ma'am, if you just step aside, No, Ayanna said gently, cutting him off. I'll stand right here until you decide whether you're going to honor my confirmed reservation or escalate this further. Her tone was not defiant, it was resolute, and that, perhaps, was more disarming than anger would have been. The businessman's latest LinkedIn update pinged on someone's phone nearby. They read it aloud. Crowd support now overwhelming. Passenger refusing to step aside. Airline staff visibly flustered. The man in the leather jacket chuckled under his breath. Cynthia's cheeks flushed. We can't just let anyone. Ayanna turned her head slightly. Anyone like me. The question cut through the noise. The murmuring stopped for a beat. Cynthia opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to frame an answer that would sound acceptable in front of so many witnesses. The live stream ticked past 5,800 viewers. In the comments, someone wrote, "She's baiting them into saying it. Smart." Another replied, "This is checkmate in slow motion." Captain Ellison looked between the three of them. "We're out of time," he said, glancing at his watch. "Either she boards now or we leave without her, and I'll be filing an incident report either way." Patrick shifted uncomfortably. "Let's wait just another moment for the call." Ayanna adjusted her briefcase again, the faint imprint of the federal seal catching the light for an instant. Lynn noticed, and so did the woman in the gray suit. This time, a few passengers exchanged knowing looks, as if they were beginning to piece together that Ayanna was not just any traveler. The teenager's friend whispered, "She's somebody important." The live stream chat lit up with similar speculation. Ayanna simply stood, calm and patient, letting the crowd's curiosity grow. Every minute that passed made the eventual reveal more impactful. Every second they delayed her became part of the evidence. The hum of the boarding area had shifted again. This was no longer just tension. It was anticipation. Something was coming, and everyone could feel it. The crowd had settled into a tense quiet, the kind that comes when people know something is about to happen. The teenager's live stream viewer count was just past 6,300. The scrolling comments now peppered with guesses about Ayanna's identity. Some insisted she was a corporate executive. Others speculated she was an attorney. A few had picked up on the federal seal glimpsed on her briefcase and were connecting dots in real time. Ayanna had been waiting for this moment. She had let the scene breathe long enough for the full measure of Cynthia's and Patrick's conduct to be on display, long enough for the witnesses to see and the cameras to capture the way they had spoken to her. Now it was time to shift the weight of the room. She moved the briefcase from her left arm to her right, setting it gently on the edge of the boarding podium. The gold clasp clicked softly as she opened it halfway. A neat stack of folders lay inside, their covers stamped with formal lettering and a small but unmistakable emblem. The seal was now in full view. Cynthia's eyes flicked down and then back up. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and irritation, as though she wasn't sure whether to care. Patrick, however, leaned slightly forward, trying to read the top line of one folder. He froze for a fraction of a second. Ayanna reached into the briefcase and withdrew a slim leather credential holder. She held it in her palm, not yet offering it to anyone. Her voice was steady, her words precise. "Patrick, Cynthia, I am Dr. Ayanna Morgan, Deputy Director of the United States Transportation Safety Bureau." The words seemed to echo, not because she had raised her voice, but because the boarding area had gone completely still. Even the murmuring stopped. Lynn Parker's recording caught the shift in the air, the subtle intake of breath from several passengers, the way Patrick's shoulders stiffened. Ayanna continued, "In addition to my current role, I am the Federal Contract Compliance Officer for all aviation security partnerships. That includes Sky Vista Airways." The businessman in line immediately lowered his phone to type a rapid update. His LinkedIn followers would not have to wait long for this revelation. Patrick swallowed. "I wasn't aware." "No, Ayanna said evenly. "You weren't aware." But awareness is precisely what I deal in. Awareness of compliance. Awareness of policy violations. Awareness of patterns of behavior that threaten federal contracts. Cynthia tried to recover. "Dr. Morgan, if we'd known, that's the problem," Ayanna said, her voice never rising. "You shouldn't have to know who a passenger is to treat them with basic respect and follow your own documented procedures." Several passengers nodded. The woman in the gray suit folded her arms with a small, satisfied smile. The man in the leather jacket muttered, "Exactly." The teenager's live stream surged past 7,000 viewers. The chat exploded with reactions. Someone wrote, "Oh my God, she's the federal authority on airline compliance." Another added, "This just went nuclear." Patrick's radio crackled. Gate C17 status. He fumbled for the talk button, but didn't answer right away. He was still processing what Ayanna had just said. Ayanna didn't let the silence linger too long. She opened one of the folders in her briefcase, revealing a page with a bold header, "Annual Federal Contract Review, Sky Vista Airways." Underneath, smaller text outlined areas of concern, some of which were highlighted in yellow. Lynn's camera caught the page in perfect focus. "Section 14.3, Ayanna said clearly, states that any federal contractor engaging in discriminatory practices, including those based on race, gender, or physical appearance, is subject to immediate contract termination and a 5-year ban from federal business." Patrick's face drained of color. Cynthia glanced away, her lips pressing together. The businessman on LinkedIn posted again. Passengers Deputy Director of Federal Transportation Authority. Holds power over one bead contract with airline. Situation beyond PR. This is contractual survival. Inside the cabin. A couple of passengers close to the door were now leaning into the aisle to watch the exchange. Captain Ellison stood a few feet back, his arms crossed. He didn't say a word, but his eyes stayed on Ayanna. The teenager's live-stream comments were a blur of all caps and exclamation marks. Donations ticked upward in the corner of her screen. Ayanna closed the folder and slid it back into her briefcase, leaving the credential holder still visible in her hand. I have 23 minutes until my next call with the Senate Transportation Committee, she said. I can either spend it in seat 2A preparing to brief them, or I can spend it here documenting further evidence for the Department of Justice. Cynthia shifted uncomfortably. We never meant intent is irrelevant, Ayanna said, cutting her off without sharpness, only certainty. Impact is what matters, and the impact of your actions today is being recorded, streamed, and archived as we speak. Patrick's radio buzzed again. Gate C17, we have corporate on the line. They're requesting immediate identification of the passenger in question. He hesitated, glancing at Ayanna. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Tell them my name. Spell it for them if you have to. He lifted the radio. Passenger is Dr. Ayanna Morgan. Repeat. Dr. Ayanna Morgan. Deputy Director. United States Transportation Safety Bureau. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a clipped response. Stand by. Do not make any further moves until instructed. Ayanna glanced toward the teenage live streamer. She didn't speak to her directly, but she was aware of the tens of thousands who would soon be seeing this clip. In the age of instant media, moments like this did not fade. They expanded. She turned back to Cynthia. Ms. Blake? How long have you been with Sky Vista? 8 years, Cynthia said quietly. In those 8 years, how many times have you removed or attempted to remove a passenger based solely on your perception of their appearance? Cynthia's eyes darted toward Patrick, then down to the floor. I follow procedure. Ayanna studied her for a moment. No. Today you followed prejudice, and now your company will have to decide how to address that. The crowd murmured again, the energy shifting fully into Ayanna's control. Patrick looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else. Lynn's hands trembled slightly, but she kept the tablet steady. She knew this was the kind of footage that could change things. The teenager's viewer count jumped past 8,500. Someone in the comments wrote, She's giving them the rope, and they're tying it themselves. Ayanna closed her briefcase with a soft click. The sound seemed to signal that her part in this exchange was temporarily finished. I'm ready to board, she said. Neither Cynthia nor Patrick moved. They were waiting for a voice from corporate to tell them what to do next. But in truth, the decision had already been taken from them. The control of the room had shifted entirely. The call from the gate had taken less than 30 seconds to reach the Sky Vista executive floor. In the top corner of the airline's downtown headquarters, Martin Keegan was in a glass-walled conference room reviewing quarterly forecasts when his executive assistant burst through the door without knocking. Sir, she said, voice low but urgent. We have a situation at LAX, Gate C17, Flight 609 to D.C. Martin looked up, brows drawing together. What kind of situation? The assistant hesitated. The passenger is Dr. Ayanna Morgan. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the projector. Martin pushed his chair back slowly, as in, Deputy Director Morgan. The Federal Contract Authority. Yes. She's being blocked from boarding. There's a live stream with over 8,000 viewers. The room shifted instantly from corporate routine to controlled panic. Martin stood, straightening his tie with a deliberate motion. "Clear my schedule. Get me a direct line to the gate supervisor." On the way out, he was already calling operations. "This is Keegan. Patch me into C17. Now." Back at the gate, Patrick's radio crackled again. "Patrick, stand by for Mr. Keegan." Patrick swallowed and pressed the talk button. "Yeah, sir." The voice that came through was measured but sharp. "Patrick, explain why Dr. Ayanna Morgan is not in her seat." Patrick stammered. "We had questions about her eligibility to stop," Martin said. "Cutting him off. This is being streamed live. Every second you delay her is costing this company money and credibility. Put her on the phone." Patrick hesitated, then held the radio out toward Ayanna. "Mr. Keegan would like to speak with you." Ayanna didn't take the device. "No need," she said evenly. "I'll speak with him in person." The crowd shifted as Martin's voice came faintly through the radio. "Then keep her there. I'm on my way." Lynn glanced up, startled. "He's coming here." Patrick nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. Cynthia's arms were crossed tightly, but her eyes darted toward the jet bridge as if calculating escape routes. The teenage live streamer's viewer count ticked upward again. "This is insane," she whispered into her phone. "The CEO is coming here. Like, right here." It took Martin 12 minutes to get from the executive floor to the private car, through LAX's restricted entrance, and onto the tarmac. He ascended the jet bridge stairs flanked by 2 security officers, his expression unreadable. The passengers parted instinctively when he entered the boarding area. He was taller than most had expected, his presence filling the space without a single word. His gaze swept over the scene. Ayanna standing calmly with her briefcase. Patrick and Cynthia looking like they wished the floor would open beneath them. And a crowd of passengers whose expressions ranged from curiosity to open disapproval. Martin stepped forward, stopping in front of Ayanna. "Dr. Morgan," he said, his tone respectful, "I am deeply sorry for the treatment you've received here today." Ayanna studied him for a moment before responding. "Mr. Keegan, I imagine you've been briefed." "I have," he said, "and I can assure you this is not representative of Sky Vista's values." Ayanna's reply was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. "Your values are measured by the actions of your people, not the words in your mission statement." Several passengers murmured in agreement. The woman in the gray suit tilted her head, watching Martin closely. Martin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You're right, and that's why I'm here." The teenage live streamer whispered to her audience, "This is like a movie." Martin turned slightly toward Patrick and Cynthia. "Step aside." They obeyed without a word. Ayanna did not move immediately. She let the silence settle just enough for the weight of the moment to register. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Keegan," she said, "but an apology does not address systemic issues. What happened here is not a mistake. It's a pattern." Martin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then let's address the pattern." Patrick shifted uneasily. Cynthia stared at the floor. Ayanna's voice remained calm. "You have a $1.2 billion federal security contract. That contract contains language about discriminatory practices and compliance obligations. Today's events fall under that scope." The words hung heavy in the air. Martin glanced at the crowd, then back at Ayanna. "I am aware. Are you also aware," she continued, "that this interaction is being documented from multiple angles and streamed live to an audience that now includes journalists, lawmakers, and your competitors?" Martin's gaze flickered toward the teenage girl holding her phone. She raised her eyebrows and gave a small wave, as if to confirm she knew exactly how much leverage she was holding. "Yes," Martin said finally. "I am aware." Ayanna regarded him for a moment, then nodded once. "Then we can discuss next steps in a setting that is not a boarding area. But first, I will take my seat." Martin gestured toward the jet bridge. "Of course." As Ayanna stepped forward, several passengers instinctively moved aside, giving her a clear path. Lynn's camera followed her until she disappeared into the cabin. The captain, still standing just inside the aircraft door, greeted her with a quiet nod. Martin remained in the boarding area for a moment longer, addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will be departing shortly." As the boarding door closed, Martin motioned for Patrick and Cynthia to stay behind. His voice dropped to a level only they could hear. "We'll be having a very different conversation when this flight is in the air, inside the cabin." Ayanna placed her briefcase in the overhead bin and settled into seat 2A. She could feel the subtle shift in the energy around her. First-class passengers gave her polite nods or small smiles. Even the flight attendants in the cabin seemed more deliberate in their movements, aware of who was now in their midst. The teenage live streamer's feed continued until the plane began taxiing. By then, the clip had been shared across multiple platforms, gaining momentum far beyond the boarding gate. In the quiet of her seat, Ayanna opened her notebook and began to jot down key points. Not just about the incident, but about the systemic vulnerabilities it exposed. She knew this was no longer just about her personal dignity. This was about setting a precedent. Back in the terminal, Martin watched the plane push back from the gate. He knew the next 48 hours would be decisive. Sky Vista's legal team would be working nonstop. Public relations would be on defense. And the fate of their billion-dollar contract now rested on the outcome of his next meeting with Dr. Ayanna Morgan. The plane leveled off at 36,000 feet, but the tension from the gate had followed them into the sky. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow, and the first-class passengers began settling in with drinks and quiet conversations. Ayanna sat in seat 2A, the window to her left framing a stretch of cloud lit by the late afternoon sun. Her briefcase rested under the seat in front of her, locked. She had her notebook open on the tray table, pen poised over a fresh page. She wrote in concise bullet points chronology of events, names, observed behaviors, passenger reactions, live recording data sources. Each point was a piece of the puzzle that would become the formal report. The flight attendant assigned to first class, a young man named Devon, approached with a cautious smile. "Dr. Morgan, Mr. Keegan asked if you'd be willing to receive a message." Ayanna looked up, her pen still in hand. "From the CEO." "Yes, ma'am." He said he'll keep it brief. She nodded once. "I'll read it." Devon handed her a folded note. It was written in Martin Keegan's handwriting, careful, deliberate script. "I recognize the depth of the problem this incident reveals. I am prepared to meet at your convenience after landing to discuss corrective actions. My intent is to ensure Sky Vista remains in compliance with federal standards and restores your trust." Ayanna read it twice. Trust, she thought, is not restored with promises on paper at 36,000 feet. It is rebuilt in actions on the ground. She set the note beside her notebook, but did not respond immediately. 2 rows back, the teenage live streamer was whispering into her phone. "The comments are going insane. We hit over 10,000 viewers while we were still on the ground. People are making hashtags." Her friend giggled softly. "What kind of hashtags?" "Masha Site 2A. Morgan via Ski Vista." And, "Oh my God, this one's trending. Dasho too big for first class." They're flipping the insult into something empowering. Ayanna could hear snippets of their conversation but kept her attention on her notes. She was already thinking beyond the hashtags. The public reaction was fuel, but the real work was in making sure this did not become another forgotten viral moment. In the galley, Devon passed Martin in the narrow aisle. The CEO had decided to walk the cabin under the pretext of checking on passengers, but his real destination was seat 2A. When he reached her row, he paused, one hand resting lightly on the seat back ahead. "Dr. Morgan," he said quietly, "I don't want to intrude." "You already are," she said, without looking up. Martin hesitated, then pulled the empty aisle seat beside her slightly forward and sat down. His posture was formal, but his tone was lower than it had been at the gate. "I came up here because I need to hear from you directly. What happens next?" Ayanna closed her notebook slowly and met his eyes. "Next, I meet with my team. We evaluate your company's compliance record. We examine the incident in the context of prior complaints and grievances. Then we determine if your contract remains viable." Martin exhaled. "If it's about retraining staff—" "This isn't about retraining," she interrupted. "It's about the culture that made Cynthia and Patrick believe their actions were acceptable. Training without accountability is decoration. It fades." Martin leaned back slightly. "Then what would accountability look like to you?" Ayanna considered for a moment before speaking. "Immediate internal review, public acknowledgement, compensation for affected passengers, and structural changes that ensure the discretion given to frontline staff is not a weapon for discrimination." In the row across the aisle, the businessman with the LinkedIn updates was clearly listening, though he pretended to focus on a tablet screen. Ayanna didn't mind. Every word she spoke could be overheard. Martin rubbed his temple. "You know what this could do to us financially?" "Yes," she said. "And you know what this could do to the federal government's trust in your ability to operate under its oversight." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The hum of the engines filled the space between their words. Martin finally nodded. "I'll have my legal and operations teams meet us as soon as we land." Ayanna returned to her notebook, making a small note beside the word Keegan, willing to negotiate under pressure. Aware of contract stakes, responsive but untested in follow-through. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "If you need anything during the flight, I'll let the crew know," she said, returning her attention to her notes. Back near the galley, Martin stopped to speak quietly with Devon, instructing him to make sure Ayanna's needs were prioritized for the rest of the flight. Devon nodded, though he could tell Ayanna was not the type to request special treatment. Meanwhile, the live streamer's video from the gate was being clipped into shorter segments and spreading faster. News outlets had started to request permission to use the footage. Commentators were already analyzing her calm demeanor, contrasting it with the visibly flustered airline staff. Ayanna's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. It was a secure message from her chief of staff. "Incident has reached major media. Committee chair aware. Will brief you before your call." She replied with a single word, "Understood," an hour later, as the cabin lights dimmed further for meal service. Ayanna stared at the untouched salad in front of her. Her mind was elsewhere on the internal pushback she knew would come from within Sky Vista's senior ranks, on the whispers from other carriers watching closely, on the opportunity this gave her to set a precedent that might ripple across the industry. She thought about Cynthia's face when she asked if she judged other passengers by appearance, the flicker of discomfort, the evasive answer. That was where change had to begin, by removing the ability for prejudice to hide behind procedure. Her pen moved again, sketching the outline of a potential compliance amendment. Stronger anti-discrimination protocols, mandatory external audits, whistleblower protections. She imagined what the industry could look like if this became the new standard. Somewhere in the cabin, a passenger sneezed. A glass clinked against a tray. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly below, indifferent to the human tensions playing out above them. Ayanna closed her notebook and leaned back, her eyes on the darkness beyond the window. The plane cut through the night air, but she knew the real turbulence would come after landing. The landing was smooth, almost gentle, but inside the cabin, Ayanna felt the familiar shift that came when a flight's final minutes carried the weight of unfinished business. Passengers began unbuckling seatbelts, retrieving bags from overhead compartments, chattering about hotels, meetings, and dinner plans. Ayanna stayed seated, her briefcase still under the seat, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She was in no rush to step into the next scene, though she knew it was coming. Devon appeared at her side. "Dr. Morgan, Mr. Keegan has arranged for a private meeting room in the terminal. His legal counsel and operations director will be present." Ayanna's eyes moved to the front of the cabin, where Martin stood near the exit, speaking quietly to another crew member. "I assume this is happening immediately after deplaning?" "Yes, ma'am," Devon said. She gave a short nod. "Lead the way when the aisle clears." The passengers filed out, some giving her small nods or murmured words of support as they passed. The woman in the gray suit stopped briefly beside her seat. "Whatever you decide to do, make it count," she said quietly, before stepping into the aisle and disappearing toward the jet bridge. When it was Ayanna's turn, Devon guided her down the aisle. Martin was waiting. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said as they stepped off the aircraft. His tone carried more formality now, as if every syllable was being measured. The meeting room was on a secure mezzanine level of the terminal, a glass-walled space overlooking the runways. Inside, two people were already seated at a long table, a woman in a tailored navy suit with a leather-bound portfolio, and a man in a charcoal gray suit with a tablet open in front of him. Martin made the introductions. "This is Julia Hart, our general counsel, and Daniel Ross, director of operations." Ayanna took her seat at the head of the table, setting her briefcase beside her chair. Julia's eyes followed the movement of the case before she looked back up. Martin remained standing for a moment before taking the seat opposite Ayanna. He didn't waste time. "I'll be direct. We want to understand what steps you expect us to take to avoid termination of our contract." Ayanna's gaze moved from Martin to Julia, then to Daniel, before returning to Martin. "The first step is acknowledgement. You need to state clearly and publicly that what happened today was unacceptable." Daniel shifted in his seat. "Public statements can invite legal complications." Ayanna's voice cut cleanly through his objection. "Silence invites more damage than honesty. You have already been tried in the court of public opinion. The only way forward is to own the mistake before the narrative owns you." Julia uncrossed her arms, her pen tapping once against the table. And beyond acknowledgement, Ayanna reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the table. "This is a preliminary framework. It's not exhaustive, but it covers the immediate non-negotiables." Julia scanned the page. Mandatory external bias audits for all customer-facing staff, quarterly reporting to the Transportation Safety Bureau, whistleblower protections, compensation for impacted passengers, and immediate suspension of the employees involved. "Yes," Ayanna said, "suspension pending a formal review. And that review cannot be conducted solely by your internal HR. It must involve an independent body." Martin leaned forward. "If we agree to this, will it guarantee our contract remains intact?" Ayanna didn't answer right away. She let the question hang, the quiet punctuated by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Agreeing is the beginning. Following through is what will be evaluated. Julia glanced at Martin, then back at Ayanna. This will be costly. Ayanna's eyes were steady. So is losing a billion-dollar contract and the federal clearance that comes with it, Daniel interjected, his voice sharper now. You understand that we can't just dismantle our operational procedures overnight. You don't have to dismantle them, Ayanna said. You have to rebuild the foundation so it stops producing cracks. Outside the glass wall, a plane lifted into the sky, its engines roaring. The sound seemed to underscore the weight of the conversation. Martin folded his hands. Dr. Morgan, may I ask, why are you pushing this hard? Most people would be satisfied with a personal apology and a settlement. Ayanna's gaze didn't waver. Because most people aren't in a position to change the system. I am. And I have seen too many incidents fade into obscurity because the person harmed didn't have the leverage to demand more. I'm not interested in being a headline. I'm interested in making sure that 8 months from now, a passenger who looks like me isn't standing at a gate being told they don't belong. Julia's pen stopped tapping. Daniel looked down at his tablet. Martin exhaled slowly, as though the answer had been one he expected but still needed to hear aloud. I'll need to take this to the board, he said finally. You'll need to take it to the public first. Ayanna replied, Your board already knows the stakes. The public needs to know you understand them. Julia began making notes, her voice quieter now. We can draft something tonight. Martin stood. Then we'll get to work. Ayanna remained seated as they left, her eyes on the sheet of paper still in Julia's hand. She knew this was only the first of several meetings, but she also knew that once they walked out of that room, the next phase of the fight would begin, the one fought in press releases, policy changes, and the invisible spaces where corporate culture is shaped. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her chief of staff. Media requests have tripled. Committee wants a debrief tomorrow morning. Ayanna typed a reply. Book the earliest slot. I'll be ready. She sat for a moment longer, watching another plane taxi toward the runway. In the reflection of the glass, she could see her own face calm, composed, but with the weight of responsibility in her eyes. This was not just her battle. It was one she carried for countless others who never had the chance to fight it. When she finally rose, she picked up her briefcase and walked out into the terminal. The cameras would be waiting. The questions would be sharp, but her answers were already written. The next morning, the air in Washington carried the faint chill of early spring. The streets around the Capitol were already busy when Ayanna's car pulled up to the Senate office building. Reporters clustered along the steps, microphones ready, cameras angled toward the entrance. She stepped out, briefcase in hand, her navy coat falling neatly over her shoulders. The questions began immediately. Dr. Morgan, will you recommend terminating the Sky Vista contract? Is this incident part of a larger pattern of bias in air travel? What message do you hope to send to the airline industry? Ayanna kept walking, her face calm, her pace steady. She knew any comment before the hearing would be taken out of context. Better to save her words for the official record. Inside, the marble corridors echoed with footsteps. A staffer from the Transportation Committee met her at the elevator. The chair's ready for you. Dr. Morgan, they've set aside 90 minutes for your testimony. 90 minutes. That was enough time to lay out the facts and shape the conversation that would follow. The hearing room was filled with the low murmur of senators, aides, and press. At the center of the long dais, Senator Eleanor Whitford, chair of the Transportation Committee, gavelled the session to order. "Dr. Morgan," she began, "thank you for joining us on such short notice. We've reviewed preliminary reports of the incident involving Sky Vista Airways. We'd like to hear your account in your own words." Ayanna adjusted the microphone. "Thank you. Madam Chair, yesterday afternoon, at Los Angeles International Airport, I was denied boarding to my assigned first-class seat on Flight 609 to Washington, D.C. The justification given by the gate supervisor and senior flight attendant was inconsistent with my ticket and boarding status. Passengers witnessed and recorded the exchange, which has since been viewed by hundreds of thousands of people." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a document. "What I experienced was not an isolated misunderstanding. It was the manifestation of systemic issues in airline operations that allow discretionary authority to be influenced by bias, whether conscious or unconscious." The room was silent except for the clicking of a few pens. Ayanna continued, her tone even but carrying. "In my role as Deputy Director of the U.S. Transportation Safety Bureau, I oversee compliance for carriers holding federal contracts. Those contracts require adherence to anti-discrimination provisions. Sky Vista's current conduct raises serious questions about its compliance." Senator Whitford leaned forward. "Dr. Morgan, are you saying this incident could warrant contract termination?" "I'm saying," Ayanna replied, "that unless corrective measures are implemented and sustained, the justification for that contract becomes untenable." From the corner of the room, a photographer's camera shutter clicked in rapid succession. Ayanna went on, "This is not about one airline. This is about an industry where similar complaints surface regularly, yet little structural change occurs. If a high-profile incident like mine can happen in broad daylight, imagine the countless others that happen quietly to passengers without the means to challenge them." Senator Malik Torres, seated 2 chairs down, spoke next. "What measures would you consider sufficient to prevent incidents like this?" Ayanna referred to the sheet she had given Sky Vista the night before. Independent bias audits, mandatory public reporting of discrimination complaints, external oversight in personnel reviews where bias is alleged, and meaningful consequences for violations, up to and including termination of federal contracts. A murmur ran through the press section. The measures were aggressive by industry standards. Senator Whitford tapped her pen thoughtfully. "You're proposing an industry-wide standard, not just corrective action for one company." "That's correct." Ayanna said, "We have the opportunity to set a precedent that applies to all federally contracted carriers. Sky Vista is the current focus, but it should not be the only one to change." For the next 40 minutes, senators took turns asking about specific policies, legal authority, and anticipated resistance from carriers. Ayanna answered each question with precision, citing past cases, compliance data, and the economic argument for ensuring passenger trust. Finally, Senator Whitford asked the question everyone knew was coming. "Dr. Morgan, what do you say to those who will accuse you of using your personal experience to push a broader agenda?" Ayanna's answer was steady, her voice firm. "I say that leadership requires turning personal experiences into opportunities for systemic improvement. My position gives me the leverage to do that. To ignore the larger implications would be to waste that responsibility." When the hearing adjourned, Ayanna gathered her papers. The press surged forward again, but this time she stopped at the microphones outside the committee room. "Yesterday's incident is not just about me," she told them. "It is about the responsibility of every carrier to treat every passenger with equal dignity, regardless of appearance, background, or status. The measures I've proposed are not punishments. They are safeguards safeguards that protect passengers and the industry alike. Her words were carried live on several news channels. In Sky Vista's corporate offices, Martin Keegan watched from his desk, his jaw tight. He knew public sentiment was shifting, and quickly. Julia Hart entered his office. "We've started drafting the public statement. But, Martin, you need to know the other major carriers are watching this. If Ayanna's framework becomes policy, it will change the entire industry." Martin turned off the television. "Then we need to decide whether we're going to fight it or lead it." Back at her own office later that day, Ayanna reviewed messages from colleagues, advocates, and even strangers thanking her for speaking out. She read each one, aware that their gratitude came with an unspoken plea: do not let this moment fade. She placed the messages in a folder labeled Support Letters. Not for ego, but for the reminder that change was never just about one person's resolve. It was about carrying the voices of those who could not be in the room. Her phone buzzed. Another secure message from her chief of staff, media storm intensifying. Sky Vista expected to release statement tonight. Ayanna leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes briefly. Tonight would be another battle in the war of narratives, but the foundation was set. The hearing had widened the frame from one gate at LAX to an entire industry. And now, the choice would be Martin Keegan's to resist until the inevitable, or to step forward and meet the moment on her terms. Night settled over Washington with a soft glow on the river, but the city did not feel quiet. Phones kept lighting up. Alerts kept coming. By the time the clock crossed 9, a draft of Sky Vista's public statement had already leaked to 2 reporters. It began to circulate in screenshots, each line dissected by strangers with quick thumbs and sharp memories. Ayanna read the draft on her laptop in her office. The header was clean. The tone was contrite. The promises were many. She read it once slowly, then a second time with a pen in hand. She underlined verbs and circled timelines. She paused at the section that named the incident directly and acknowledged harm. That was new. Most statements avoided clear ownership. This one did not. Her chief of staff knocked twice and stepped in. The look on her face said she had more to tell than a simple update. Sky Vista is set to publish at 10. They want you to know ahead of time. She placed a printed copy on the desk, a version with final signatures marked in blue. Ayanna scanned the last page. The signatures were real. Martin Keegan, Julia Hart, Daniel Ross. She returned to the earlier pages and began to read aloud. Not for her aid, but for the weight of hearing the words in the room. We acknowledge that our staff failed to uphold the dignity of a passenger, and that this failure reflects a deeper need for structural reform. We will suspend the employees involved pending an independent review. We will create a $100 million fund dedicated to comprehensive bias training and external audits. We will implement a direct-to-federal reporting portal for discrimination complaints. We will accept 3 years of independent oversight, with quarterly public reports. She set the paper down. The words were strong. They were also only words. She looked at the clock. 10 was near, across town, in a floor of glass and steel. Martin stood in a conference room facing a wall of screens. One screen showed the statement layout ready to go live. Another showed a graph of social sentiment moving from red toward a cautious gray. A third screen carried a live feed of a business channel that had made the story its lead. Julia sat at the table with 2 communications managers, both pale with focus. Daniel stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, instructing regional managers on talking points for the morning shift. Martin tapped the table once with a knuckle. "Read it again," he said. "No adjectives we cannot defend. No promises we cannot keep. Speak to passengers first and the market second. Julia read. Her voice did not shake. When she reached the line about independent oversight, she looked up. "This is the one that will sting," she said, "but it is the one that matters." Martin nodded. "Then publish at 10 on the dot." The statement appeared on Sky Vista's site and every social channel they controlled. The thumbnail image was not a smiling crew. It was simple text on a quiet field. Comment sections opened like floodgates. Some voices were furious. Some were skeptical. Some surprised even the communications team by saying, "If they do all this and make it real, I will fly them again." Ayanna watched the first wave of reactions scroll by. She looked for one thing more than any other: a timeline. Not a promise without an anchor, but a date that would force action. There it was on the third page. First report to be filed within 30 days. First public audit within 90. Creation of an ombuds office within 45. She underlined each number and felt the smallest release of tension in her shoulders. Her phone rang. The caller ID was blocked, but she knew the cadence before she answered. Martin's voice carried the careful strength of someone who had been rehearsing words for hours. "Dr. Morgan, we have published. We will follow through." She let the silence sit long enough to make space for truth. Then she asked the question that mattered. "Will your board sign binding resolutions by morning? Not a plan that can be softened. A vote that cannot be undone without public notice." "Yes," he said. "First agenda at 7. I will send the resolutions to your office before 6. What about Cynthia Blake and Patrick Sloan?" "Suspended tonight," he said. "Independent review by a third party. We will not handle this in-house alone." "What about Lynn Parker?" she asked. "The trainee who documented the events." Martin paused. "Protected status effective immediately. She will not face retaliation. She will be thanked." Ayanna wrote each answer in her notebook. She did not congratulate him. She did not soothe him. She did not need to. They each had a role to play. Hers was to hold the line without apology. Outside her window, the streetlights traced a path down the avenue. Somewhere in that glow, the teenage live streamer was on a late-night show via video call, describing what she had seen at the gate and what it had felt like to watch a room tilt toward justice. Her voice trembled a little, then steadied as she said, "The part that got me was how calm she stayed, like she knew the ground would shift if she did not give them an excuse to claim she was the problem." In a smaller apartment across the river, Cynthia sat in silence at her kitchen table. The email from Human Resources glowed on her phone. Suspension pending investigation. She stared at the words until they blurred. She thought of the 8 years she had spent memorizing service scripts and safety checks, the long nights, the double shifts. She thought of the moment at the gate when she chose to perform certainty instead of asking herself why she felt it. A voice in her head argued that she was only following rules. Another voice, one she did not like to hear, asked why she had insisted on following them with that tone, in that public way, toward that woman. She closed her eyes. She did not know what the investigation would reveal, but for the first time she wondered how many small choices had brought her to this one. Patrick sat in his car in the parking garage, unable to turn the key. He listened to a voicemail from his brother and deleted it halfway through. He had watched the statement published from a phone on low battery. He knew the cameras had loved his hesitation, his careful words, the way he stood between a passenger and a door she had a right to walk through. He pressed his forehead to the steering wheel and stayed there long enough for the cold to creep through his jacket. He had told himself he was protecting the brand. He wondered now what that brand looked like when seen through someone else's eyes. Back at Sky Vista headquarters, Julia sent a short email to Martin at 10:22. Statement live. Early response mixed but measurable improvement in trust indicators. Legal prep for board vote underway. She added one line she had not planned to write. Thank you for choosing the hard path. He wrote back one word. Necessary. Ayanna's chief of staff returned with tea and a stack of messages. Civil rights groups were offering support and partnership. Passenger advocates were asking for meetings. 2 major carriers had quietly reached out through back channels to ask for a copy of the framework she had outlined. She took a sip of tea and felt the warmth move through the tension in her jaw. The story was no longer about one flight. It was becoming a map others wanted to follow or resist. Her inbox pinged again. A note from Senator Whitford. Solid statement. We will watch delivery. If Sky Vista moves as written, other carriers will bend. Proud of your clarity today. Ayanna typed a simple reply. Thank you. More tomorrow. She shut the laptop and leaned back. The quiet of the office felt earned. She let herself think of her father, of the way he would have smiled at the idea of a portal where passengers could send their complaints directly to federal oversight without fear of being ignored. He would have said, give people a path and watch what they carry across it. Just before 11, her phone chimed one last time. A text from a number saved simply as Lynn. I do not know if I should message you, but I wanted to say thank you for not letting it fade. Ayanna stared at the words, surprised by the gentle ache they stirred. She replied after a moment, thank you for pressing record. Midnight drew close. The city exhaled a little. In homes and hotel rooms and offices, people closed screens and let the day recede. But the work did not sleep. Documents were being drafted. Votes were being scheduled. A new standard was moving, not yet law, but already alive in the choices people would make when the sun returned. Ayanna turned off the lamp and stood at the window for a long breath. The glass held her reflection, steady and unadorned. Tomorrow she would ask for signatures, not promises. Tomorrow she would ask for timelines, not sentiment. Tonight she allowed herself one small truth spoken into the quiet room. This is how we move a wall, one push, then another, until the first brick comes loose. She picked up her briefcase, the leather cool in her hand, and walked toward the door. The board met at 7. The vote was not a conversation. It was a reckoning. Resolutions passed in sequence. Independent oversight approved. Public reporting approved. Whistleblower protection approved. The direct-to-federal reporting portal approved. The compensation fund approved. The Ombuds office approved with a mandate to report outside the chain of command. At 6:58, Martin sent a PDF to Ayanna's office. It was not a press release. It was a set of signatures beneath enforceable timelines. The first response due in 30 days. The Ombuds office staffed within 45. The first independent audit published within 90. The board committed to quarterly reviews in public. Ayanna read each page at her desk before the city was fully awake. A slow calm moved through her as the structure clicked into place. She turned a fresh sheet in her notebook and wrote 3 words. Now we build. By noon, the cameras were back. Sky Vista held a briefing in a plain room with a blue backdrop and a single podium. Martin stepped up without notes. Julia stood to his left. Daniel to his right. His voice was clear. He did not blame confusion. He did not say if anyone was offended. He said what had happened. He named the harm. He named the steps. He named the dates. He stated the cost and called it an investment in trust. Reporters asked hard questions. Some tried to pull him into defensive language. He stayed on the ground he had chosen. When one asked if this was done to protect the billion-dollar contract, he answered simply, "It is done to protect the dignity of passengers. If we protect that, our contracts will follow." Ayanna watched from her office and did not smile. She did not need to. She placed the statement next to the board vote and moved to the next task. Implementation. The word looks simple in print. It is not simple in life. The portal team wrote code at a pace that surprised even themselves. Data standards were drafted in 2 days. A secure pipeline was built to transmit reports directly to federal oversight, tagged by flight number and gate and staff role. An interface for passengers went live with clear language and no fine print to hide the pain. The first report arrived 20 minutes after launch, then another, then 20. Each one became a point and a map the industry had never fully drawn. Training did not begin with slides. It began with listening. Rooms filled with crews who had practiced scripts for years. Now they heard voices they were not used to hearing. Advocates, historians, psychologists who could explain what discretion becomes when mixed with fear and status. Community leaders who could speak about harm without turning people into enemies. A woman described being told to change seats because a passenger did not want to sit next to her child. A man described being questioned twice for the same boarding pass while others passed without pause. The room sat in a quiet that had weight. Cynthia listened from the second row of a training she was required to attend. Her posture was stiff at first, then it softened. She took notes like a student who had missed too many classes and needed to catch up. In the break, she stood outside and called her mother. "I do not know how to fix this," she whispered. Her mother said, "You cannot fix it with one choice, just like you did not break it with one choice. You can start today by learning how to see." Patrick sat in a smaller room across the hall in a coaching session for supervisors. The facilitator asked them to describe a time they had felt the need to perform certainty. Patrick spoke about the gate as if the scene were playing again in front of him. He heard himself say the words he had chosen that day. He heard how they sounded when he was not the one saying them. He wrote a sentence on a card and kept it in his wallet. Respect is not a brand. Lynn received a short letter from the Ombuds's office that used plain words. Your documentation helped establish facts when memory alone would have failed. No action will be taken against you. If anyone pressures you to alter or withhold evidence, contact us immediately. She folded the letter and placed it in a notebook she kept by her bed. She did not show it to anyone. She did not need to. She knew it would be there if the ground moved again. 30 days later, SkyVista filed its first public report. The document did not polish the data. It counted. It revealed. It named where complaints were clustered and where change had begun. It included a paragraph authored by the independent monitor. That paragraph was short. Progress is measurable. More is required. The market did not fall. It steadied. 90 days later, the first audit landed on a public site at 9 a.m. Reporters were ready. Advocates were ready. Competitors were ready. The document confirmed reduction in complaint volume and improvement in response times. It also described a gap. The policy accounted for bias in frontline contact. It did not yet address bias in upgrade algorithms and seat assignment rules. The company committed to another layer of fixes. It was not a scandal. It was a blueprint. In that window between reports, a phrase began to travel. It started as a staff shorthand, then became a headline. The Morgan Protocol. It was not a law. It was a set of steps that moved from personal incident to systemic change. Document in real time. Address in public. Build independent oversight. Tie promises to dates. Submit to audits that can be read by anyone with a screen. Do not defend what you should repair. Ayanna kept a quiet distance from the label. She did not need her name on a protocol. What mattered was seeing that playbook used by people she would never meet. She heard from a hospital system administrator in Chicago who renamed a patient intake process using that framework. She heard from a hotel chain that added a direct-to-regulator channel for discrimination complaints. She heard from a group of college students who built a campus version of the portal on a weekend and sent her the link. 6 months after Gate C17, SkyVista's latest report showed a steep decline in verified discrimination complaints and a significant rise in passenger satisfaction measures across multiple routes. The stock price had recovered not through a marketing campaign, but through the slow math of trust. Journalists who had been sharp in the early days wrote follow-ups with more balanced lines. Progress is not a headline. It is a timeline you can check. The Senate committee held a follow-up session. Senator Whitford opened with a statement that was both firm and measured. The industry is learning that accountability is not a punishment. It is a maintenance schedule for dignity. Ayanna testified briefly. She recommended that the reporting and oversight model be extended to all carriers with federal contracts. A draft bill circulated within a week. The name on the top did not matter. The clauses inside did. On a humid morning in late summer, Ayanna flew again out of LAX. It was not a ceremonial trip. It was a workday. She arrived early and moved through the terminal without a camera waiting. At Gate C17, a different team stood at the door. Devin was there, assigned to first class again. He recognized her and nodded once, professional and warm. The woman in the gray suit from months earlier appeared at the edge of the boarding area with a carry-on and the same calm eyes. She did not approach. She did not need to. Ayanna lifted a hand, and the woman lifted hers. That was enough. A teenager walked by with a backpack and a smile that looked familiar. The live streamer from that day. She had cut her hair. She wore a shirt with a small line of text near the hem. Quiet power. She looked up and met Ayanna's eyes for a second. "Thank you," she mouthed without sound. Ayanna inclined her head in return. When she took her seat, Ayanna rested the briefcase under the seat in front of her and watched the cabin settle. People buckled belts. An overhead bin clicked shut. The crew moved through their checks with a focus she recognized from people who had learned through fire. The captain made a simple announcement. No talk of delays, no hint of apology, just the facts. Then the engines rolled and the plane gathered itself to leave the ground. Ayanna closed her eyes. She did not replay the worst parts of that day anymore. She replayed the moment the portal went live and the first report arrived from someone who had been given a way to speak. She replayed the board vote where dates met signatures. She replayed a mother and father who had written to her to say their teenage son had been treated with courtesy on a flight, where last year he would not have been. She thought, this is how a standard is born, not in thunder, in sequence. When the wheels lifted, the cabin hummed, and the city fell away beneath them. Ayanna opened her notebook to a blank page. She wrote a single sentence before the seatbelt light went dark. Quiet power changes more than temper ever could. She closed the notebook and let the clouds arrange themselves into a calm horizon. It started as a small cut at a boarding door. It ended as a standard that guards every seat on every route that follows. We watched a room choose sides, a company choose truth over spin, and a leader choose reform over revenge. Quiet power did what loud anger could not. It turned a moment of bias into a map for accountability. Remember this when the world tries to measure a person by appearance or by stereotype. Dignity is not a perk. It is a promise. Discrimination is not a misunderstanding. It is harm, and every witness has a role. Document. Speak up. Stand beside the person in the storm. The Morgan Protocol lives wherever people decide that procedure will serve humanity, not the other way around. If this story left you with a sting and also with hope, hold both. Carry the tenderness forward. Refuse the small cruelties. Choose the larger love. Our next video brings another flight, another quiet decision, and another reminder that justice can travel at cruising altitude. Like, share, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And tell us in the comments what dignity means to you.